She's right, you know, Layla said softly. You know what to do with it. He looked at her, his eyes still wet. What do I do? She smiled gently. Whatever you think is right. But if you're asking me, I think you should open it. Not as a bookstore, as a community space. A place where people can gather, learn, and grow. He stared at her, then back at the key. A community space, he repeated slowly. Like the fund, but bigger. A place for books, but also for people. She nodded. Yes, exactly that. He felt a spark of excitement ignite in his chest. We could have reading groups, and classes, and workshops. She laughed. Now you're thinking. The next day, Tariq stood in front of the locked bookshop door. Farid was beside him, and Layla was on his other side. A small crowd of neighbors had gathered, curious about what was happening. Tariq held up the key and smiled. This is a new beginning, he announced. For all of us. He slid the key into the lock and turned it. The door swung open with a familiar creak. Dust motes danced in the sunlight streaming through the windows. Inside, the empty shelves waited, ready to be filled again. Tariq stepped across the threshold and felt a warmth spread through his chest. He was home. Not the apartment, not the office. Here, in this space of stories and possibilities. He turned back to the crowd and spread his arms wide. This is not my bookshop, he said. This is our bookshop. Anyone who wants to help, anyone who has something to contribute, you are welcome. The crowd murmured with excitement. A few people stepped forward and began cleaning the dusty shelves. Others brought boxes of books from their homes. Farid grabbed a broom and started sweeping. Layla began organizing the front counter. Tariq stood in the center of it all, watching the chaos transform into order. He felt a surge of gratitude so powerful, it almost knocked him over. He leaned against a shelf and closed his eyes, letting the feeling wash over him. Days passed. The bookshop came alive again. Volunteers came and went, painting walls and arranging shelves. Books appeared from every corner of the neighborhood. Children came to read in the front room. Adults came to share stories in the back room. Tariq watched it all with a quiet, radiant joy. One afternoon, Mr. Aziz from the bakery arrived with a tray of fresh pastries. He set them on the front counter without a word, his stern face softening slightly. Tariq looked at him and nodded. Mr. Aziz nodded back. That was enough. Some friendships were built on shared understanding, not words. Layla organized a weekly reading group for the elderly. They came every Thursday afternoon, their eyes bright with anticipation. Tariq would read aloud to them, his voice calm and steady. They would discuss the stories afterward, their voices lively and full of laughter. He had never felt more useful. The community fund and the bookshop became twin pillars of the neighborhood. People came to the fund for practical help and to the bookshop for emotional support. Tariq moved between them like a bridge, connecting resources to needs, hope to action. He had found his purpose. It wasn't about money, it was about meaning. Farid started a youth program at the bookshop, teaching financial literacy to teenagers. Tariq joined him occasionally, sharing simple lessons about saving and investing. He never mentioned the loop. He never needed to. The lessons stood on their own, wise and practical. One evening, a young woman came to the bookshop and asked for help. She had inherited a small sum of money and didn't know what to do with it. Tariq remembered his own inheritance, the lottery, the stocks, the gold. He smiled and sat down with her. First, he said, "Tell me about your dreams. What do you want to do with your life?" She spoke for an hour about her dreams. A small bakery, a garden, a place to raise a family. Tariq listened and then gave her simple, honest advice. She left with a clear plan and a hopeful smile. He watched her go and felt a deep sense of satisfaction. He had given her what he wished he had been given early on: perspective. Layla found him in the quiet moments after closing time. She would sit with him on the front step of the bookshop, watching the stars appear. They talked about everything and nothing. The future was open, unscripted, and beautiful. They were both looking forward to it together. On a particularly warm summer night, Tariq proposed to Layla. He had bought a simple silver ring from a market vendor. He knelt on the front step of the bookshop, under the stars, and asked her to marry him. Her eyes filled with tears, and she nodded before he even finished the sentence. He slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands trembling with joy. They celebrated with Farid and his girlfriend at the cafe'ad downstairs. Samir, the owner, brought out free tea and pastries, clapping Tariq on the back. "You've come a long way," Samir said with a grin. Tariq laughed and looked at Layla. "I've come exactly where I was always supposed to be." The wedding was small and intimate. They held it in the bookshop, among the shelves and the stories. Guests filled the aisles, their faces bright with happiness. Tariq's mother cried the entire time. Farid was his best man, his speech equal parts funny and heartfelt. Layla wore a simple white dress, her crimson hair flowing over her shoulders. Tariq stood at the front of the room, watching her walk toward him. The aisle was lined with books, each one a story of love or hope. She reached him and took his hands. He whispered, "You were the best thing that ever happened to me." She smiled and whispered back, "You were the best thing that ever happened to this entire neighborhood." They spent their honeymoon in a small cottage by the sea. Tariq had never seen the ocean before. He stood on the shore and watched the waves crash against the sand, mesmerized by their endless rhythm. Layla stood beside him, her arm through his. "It's like the loop," she said, "endless and repeating, but beautiful." He looked at her, his eyes soft. The loop was a prison. This is freedom. She rested her head on his shoulder. "We made it freedom, together." They stood there until the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. He had never felt more alive. When they returned, the bookshop and the fund were thriving. Mrs. Hanan had taken over much of the day-to-day management, freeing Tariq to focus on bigger dreams. He started a small scholarship program for local students. He began mentoring young entrepreneurs. He planted a garden behind the bookshop, a small green oasis in the middle of the city. He visited his mother every week. She was aging gracefully, her laughter still warm, and her hands still busy in the kitchen. She told him she was proud of him, not for the money, but for the man he had become. He held her hand and told her she was the reason he knew how to love. Farid and his girlfriend got engaged a few months later. Tariq was his best man again, this time with more experience. He threw Farid a bachelor party that consisted of board games and too much pizza. Farid laughed so hard he cried. "This is better than any club," he said. Tariq agreed. "This is real." The years rolled on, gentle and steady. The neighborhood changed. Some buildings were renovated, some businesses opened and closed. But the bookshop remained. The fund remained. And the people remained. Tariq had become a part of the fabric of the place. He belonged. One winter evening, he was sitting in the bookshop alone, reading by the fire. The flames crackled softly, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Presence behind him and turned. A young boy stood in the doorway, his face familiar. It was Omar, the boy from the street all those years ago. Omar had grown. He was a teenager now, tall and confident. He held a book in his hands, a worn copy of a classic novel. "I wanted to return this," Omar said. "It's been years." Tariq smiled and took the book. "Did you like it?" Omar nodded enthusiastically. "I loved it. I've read it 3 times. Tariq opened the book and saw notes in the margins. Omar's handwriting, thoughtful and intelligent. "You wrote in it," Tariq observed. Omar looked sheepish. "I know. I'm sorry. I just had so many thoughts." Tariq laughed warmly. "Don't apologize. That's what books are for. They're meant to be lived in." Omar sat down across from him, his eyes bright. "I want to be like you when I grow up," he said. "Someone who helps people." Tariq looked at the boy so full of hope, so full of possibility. "You already are," he said. "You just don't know it yet." Omar grinned and they sat together, reading in comfortable silence. As the fire burned low, Tariq reflected on everything that had happened. The loop, the gold, the loss, the discovery. He had entered the loop as a desperate young man and emerged as a man of purpose. He had left behind the chase for money and found something far more valuable, connection. He closed his book and looked at Omar. "Do you want to know a secret?" Omar leaned forward, his eyes wide. Tariq smiled. "The best things in life aren't things at all. They're moments, people, feelings. That's what matters." Omar nodded slowly, taking it in. "I think I understand," he said. "I think I always have." Tariq locked up the bookshop that night and walked home in the snow. The streets were quiet and peaceful. The moon was full and bright. He looked up at it and remembered his old promise. He had watched every full moon since the loop ended. He hadn't missed a single one. He smiled and continued walking. He arrived home to Layla, who was waiting for him with a warm cup of tea. She handed it to him and kissed his cold cheek. "You're late," she said, but her eyes were warm. "I was talking to Omar," he explained. "He's growing up so fast." She laughed. "They all are. That's what time does." They sat together on the couch, watching the snow fall outside the window. The yellow curtains were warm against the lamplight. The apartment was small, but it was theirs. It was filled with books and plants and photographs and love. It was more than enough. He thought about the future, not with anxiety, but with curiosity. He didn't know what it would bring, and that was the most beautiful thing. The loop had taught him to stop chasing and start living. He had learned his lesson well. He turned to Layla and took her hand. "Thank you," he said, "for everything." She looked at him, her blue eyes soft. "Thank you for letting me see you. All of you." He kissed her hand and she leaned into him. They sat in silence, watching the snow, their hearts full. The next day, Tariq went to the bookshop early. He opened the door and let the morning light flood in. He took a deep breath and smelled the familiar scent of old paper and dust. He had a meeting with Farid later to discuss a new initiative, a mentorship program for young adults. He was excited, nervous, ready. Farid arrived with his usual energy, bursting through the door with a tray of coffee. "Morning, boss," he announced. Tariq rolled his eyes. "I'm not the boss. We're partners." Farid set the coffee down and shrugged. "You're the vision. I'm the chaos. It works." Tariq laughed and took a coffee. They spent the morning planning the mentorship program. They would pair experienced professionals with young people seeking guidance. Tariq would lead the financial track. Farid would lead the creative track. Layla would lead the community track. It was perfect. It was exactly what the neighborhood needed. The first session was held in the bookshop. A dozen young people sat in a circle, their faces nervous and excited. Tariq introduced himself and told them a brief, carefully edited version of his story. He didn't mention the loop. He didn't need to. The message was the same: perseverance, growth, and the power of community. The session lasted 2 hours. At the end, the young people had formed small groups, exchanged contact information, and made plans to meet again. Tariq watched them leave, their voices buzzing with enthusiasm. He leaned against a shelf and smiled. This was the future. He could feel it. Layla came up behind him and wrapped her arms around his waist. "You're building something beautiful," she whispered. He turned in her arms and kissed her forehead. "We're building it. Everyone is building it." She looked at him, her blue eyes glowing. "I love you," she said. He answered. He walked to the window and looked out at the street. The cafe was full of morning customers. The bakery was warm and inviting. Children were playing in the snow. Life was happening. Ordinary, beautiful, unpredictable life. He had almost missed it, but he hadn't. He was here, present, grateful. He placed his hand on the window and watched his breath fog the glass. He traced a small heart with his finger. Then he turned back to the bookshop, to the warmth, to the people who filled it with life. He had everything he needed, and he would never stop paying it forward. That was the final lesson, the one that would last forever. Tariq opened his eyes to the familiar cracked ceiling, but this time something was different. He reached for his phone and saw the date, January 2nd, 2027. A full year had passed since the loop ended. He let out a slow, happy breath and pressed his palm against his chest. He had made it. A whole year of forward-moving days. He got dressed quickly and walked to the small park where he and Layla often met. She was already there, sitting on their favorite bench, her crimson hair catching the morning light. She smiled when she saw him. "Happy anniversary," she said softly. He sat beside her and took her hand. "Happy anniversary to us, and to every day after." Farid joined them an hour later with a box of pastries from Mr. Aziz's bakery. He plopped down on the grass in front of them, his purple hoodie bright against the green. "I've been thinking," he announced. "We should do something special today. Something big." Tariq raised an eyebrow. "What did you have in mind?" Farid grinned mysteriously. Farid pulled out a stack of colorful paper flowers he had made himself. "We give these to strangers, random acts of kindness, just like the loop taught us." Tariq laughed and took one of the flowers. "You made these?" Farid nodded proudly. "Don't be impressed. I had a lot of free time." They stood up and began walking through the neighborhood. They approached an elderly woman sitting alone on a park bench. Her face was tired and weathered. Tariq knelt beside her and held out a paper flower. "Good morning," he said gently. "This is for you." The woman looked at the flower, then at him, her eyes filled with tears. "No one has given me anything in years," she whispered. She took the flower with trembling hands and pressed it to her chest. Tariq smiled warmly and stood up. Layla handed her another flower, and Farid gave her a third. The woman laughed through her tears. "You children are angels." They left her smiling and continued down the street, their hearts lighter than before. They reached the bakery, and Mr. Aziz was outside sweeping the sidewalk. Tariq walked up to him and offered a paper flower. The baker stared at it with his usual stern expression, then slowly took it, tucked it into his apron pocket without a word. But Tariq saw the corner of his mouth twitch upward. That was enough. They returned to the bookshop and transformed the front room into a storytelling circle. Chairs were arranged in a semicircle, and a small sign read, "Share your story." People from the neighborhood began to arrive, young and old, rich and poor. They sat together, filling the room with warmth and anticipation. Tariq stood in the center of the circle and spoke first. "I used to be obsessed with money," he admitted. "But I was wrong. What matters is this." He gestured to the people around him. Connection, kindness, being seen. The room nodded in quiet agreement. Layla stood next and told her story of watching from the sidelines. "I used to be quiet and mysterious," she said with a smile. "But then I realized that being seen was not dangerous. It was liberating." She looked at Tariq, her blue eyes soft. "He taught me that." The audience clapped softly. A woman with a notepad and camera entered the room, a journalist from the local newspaper. She had heard about the bookshop's community work and wanted to do a story. Tariq welcomed her warmly and invited her to listen. She sat in the back, her pen moving quickly across the page. One by one, neighbors shared their stories. A young mother spoke about the fund helping her pay for her child's medicine. An elderly man spoke about the bookshop giving him purpose after retirement. The journalist captured every word, her camera clicking softly. The room was filled with laughter, tears, and hope. After the circle ended, the journalist approached Tariq. "This is incredible," she said. "What you've built here." He shook his head modestly. "I didn't build it alone. Everyone helped." She asked him what advice he would give to young people. He paused and answered, "Look up, not down at your phone or your worries. Look at the people around you. They're your real wealth." She wrote his words in her notebook. "May I quote you?" she asked. He nodded. "Please do." She thanked him and left, promising to send the article for review. Tariq watched her go and felt a quiet pride, not for himself, but for the community that had made it all possible. The article appeared in the newspaper 3 days later. The headline read, "From Obsession to Compassion, How One Man Built a Community of Hope." A photograph showed Tariq standing in the bookshop, surrounded by books and smiling. Farid burst into the office, waving the paper like a flag. "You're famous," he shouted. Tariq's mother cut out the article and taped it to her refrigerator. She stood back and admired it, her eyes glistening with pride. When Tariq visited that evening, she pointed at it without a word. He wrapped his arms around her and held her tightly. "This is because of you," he whispered. She patted his back and said, "No, this is because of you." They sat together in her kitchen, eating her famous lentil soup. She looked at him across the table, her eyes soft. "I always knew you had a good heart," she said. "You just needed to find the right way to use it." He reached across and squeezed her hand. "I found it, Mom. I really found it." Back at the community fund, the phone rang constantly. New donors were calling, inspired by the article. Mrs. Hanan answered each call with professional efficiency, her sharp eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "We have enough now to expand to the next neighborhood," she reported. Tariq stared at her in disbelief. "Already?" Farid grinned and clapped him on the back. "Told you, people want to help when they see help actually happening." Tariq nodded slowly, a plan forming in his mind. "Then let's give them something bigger. Let's start a campaign." Farid rubbed his hands together. "I love campaigns." They spent the afternoon designing a campaign poster. Tariq sketched a simple design, a hand reaching out to another hand, with the words, "We rise together." Farid added bright colors and bold fonts. Layla suggested adding the bookshop's address and the fund's website. Mrs. Hanan approved the final draft with a nod. The campaign launched the following week. Posters appeared in shop windows and on community boards. A small booth was set up outside the bookshop, offering information and accepting donations. Volunteers took shifts, talking to passers-by with enthusiasm and passion. The neighborhood came alive with energy. On the first day of the campaign, a crowd gathered outside the bookshop. People of all ages lined up to donate and to learn more. Farid was at the booth, his red cap bright and his voice booming. Tariq moved through the crowd, shaking hands and thanking everyone. The atmosphere was electric. Omar, now a confident teenager, volunteered at the booth. He handed out flyers and answered questions with surprising maturity. Tariq watched him work and felt a swell of pride. The boy he had hugged on the street years ago had grown into a young leader. He walked over and placed a hand on Omar's shoulder. "Look at you. Tariq said with a smile. You're a natural. Omar beamed and held up a stack of flyers. I told you I wanted to be like you. This is how I start. Tariq squeezed his shoulder gently. You're already there, Omar. You're already helping. The boy's grin widened, and he returned to his work with renewed energy. The campaign ended with a sum that exceeded all expectations. Mrs. Hanan calculated the total 3 times, then looked up with rare emotion. We have enough for 3 years of operations, she said quietly. The room erupted in cheers. Tariq leaned against the wall, overwhelmed. He felt tears on his cheeks and didn't wipe them away. With the new funds, they created a scholarship program for local students. Tariq named it the Fauzi Scholarship, in honor of the old bookshop owner. He stood in the bookshop and announced the program to the community. Applause filled the room, and he felt Fauzi's presence in every corner. Applications poured in. Students from all over the neighborhood applied, their letters filled with dreams and determination. Tariq read each one personally, sitting at his desk with a cup of tea. He found himself inspired by their resilience. They reminded him of himself, before the loop, before the lessons. One application stood out. A young woman named Noor wanted to become a teacher. She wrote about growing up in poverty and wanting to give back. Tariq read her letter 3 times, his throat tight. He called her in for an interview and found her sitting nervously in the bookshop, her eyes wide. Your letter was beautiful, he said gently. Tell me more about your dream. She spoke for 10 minutes about her love for children, her passion for education, and her determination to break the cycle of poverty. By the time she finished, Tariq had made his decision. You're our first scholar, he announced. Her eyes flooded with tears. Noor threw her arms around him in gratitude. He patted her back awkwardly, then laughed. Go tell your family, he said. Celebrate. She ran out of the bookshop, her laughter echoing behind her. Farid appeared from behind a shelf, wiping his eyes. I'm not crying, he insisted. It's just dusty in here. Tariq threw a paper ball at him. That evening, Tariq and Layla sat on their rooftop, watching the stars. He told her about Noor and the scholarship. She listened with her head on his shoulder. You're changing lives, she said softly. One person at a time. He kissed the top of her head. We're changing lives, together. They decided to start a parent mentorship program alongside the scholarship. Layla volunteered to lead it, her calm presence perfect for supporting nervous parents. Tariq helped design the curriculum, drawing on his financial experience. They worked late into the night, their excitement keeping them awake. The program launched with a meeting at the bookshop. Parents filled the chairs, their faces anxious and hopeful. Layla stood at the front and spoke with gentle authority. This is not about judgment, she said. This is about support. We are here to help you help your children. The parents relaxed visibly. Tariq led a session on financial planning for families. He spoke simply and clearly, avoiding jargon. He used examples from his own life, carefully edited, to illustrate his points. The parents leaned forward, taking notes and asking questions. He answered each one with patience and warmth. A father named Karim shared his own story. He had been helped by the fund years ago and now wanted to help others. His voice cracked as he spoke about the relief of not having to choose between food and rent. Tariq felt a lump in his throat as he listened. He knew that relief intimately. After the session, Karim approached Tariq and shook his hand firmly. You saved my family, he said, his eyes wet. I will never forget it. Tariq pulled him into an embrace. You saved yourself, he corrected. I just pointed the way. Karim nodded, unable to speak, and walked away with new strength. At home, Tariq sat at his desk and pulled out a fresh notebook. He titled it, Lessons from the Loop. He began writing the first entry, The most valuable currency is not money, it is time spent with the people you love. He paused and thought about all the faces he had seen that day. He smiled and continued writing. He wrote about the bookshop, the fund, the scholarship, the mentorship program. He wrote about the people who had made it all possible of Farid, Layla, Mrs. Hanan, his mother, Fauzi. His pen moved quickly across the page, his handwriting neat and calm. He was creating a record of the good. Layla came up behind him and wrapped her arms around his neck. She read over his shoulder, her breath warm against his ear. This is beautiful, she whispered. You're writing our story. He turned his head and kissed her cheek. I'm writing our future. She smiled and sat beside him, resting her head on his shoulder. Over the following weeks, he continued writing. He wrote about the children in the reading group, the elderly in the storytelling circle, the families in the fund. He wrote about every act of kindness he had witnessed. The notebook grew thick with pages, each one a testament to the community he had helped build. One afternoon, he received a letter in the mail. The handwriting was elegant and familiar. He opened it with trembling hands. It was from Fauzi's granddaughter, the young woman who had given him the key. She wrote, "I have been watching the bookshop from afar. I am so proud of what you have done. I would like to come and help, if you will have me." He read the letter twice, his heart pounding. He immediately wrote back, inviting her to visit any time. He paced the bookshop, his excitement barely contained. Farid found him pacing and asked what was wrong. "Fauzi's granddaughter is coming," Tariq said. "She wants to help." Farid's eyes widened. The plot thickens. She arrived a week later, the same curly dark hair and kind eyes. Her name was Amal. She walked into the bookshop and looked around with wonder. "He would have loved this," she said softly. "He always wanted the shop to be a community space." Tariq smiled and showed her around, pointing out the reading circle and the gardens. Amal settled in quickly. She helped organize the shelves and started a new program, a book club for young adults. She had her grandfather's sharp intelligence and gentle way with people. Tariq watched her work and felt a deep sense of continuity. Fauzi's legacy was alive, passed from one generation to the next. The book club became an instant success. Young adults gathered every Friday evening, their discussions lively and passionate. Amal led the conversations with skill and warmth. Tariq occasionally sat in the back and listened, his heart full. The bookshop was not just a shop anymore. It was a heartbeat. One evening, after the club ended, Amal approached Tariq. "Grandfather left something for you," she said. She handed him an old envelope. Inside was a photograph of Fauzi in his youth, standing in front of the bookshop with a young woman. On the back was written, "The shop is not the building. The shop is the people who enter it." Tariq held the photograph carefully, as if it were made of glass. He turned it over and read the words again. "He was always teaching," he said softly. Amal nodded. Until the very end. They stood in silence, honoring the old man and his wisdom. Then Tariq placed the photograph on the mantelpiece, where everyone could see it. The bookshop grew busier as summer arrived. Tourists discovered it, drawn by its reputation. But the neighborhood regulars remained its heart. Mr. Aziz still brought pastries. Mrs. Hanan still balanced the accounts. Omar still helped after school. The community had become a family. Tariq stood in the center of the bookshop one afternoon and looked around. Children were reading in the corner. Adults were talking in the back. Amal was arranging a display. Layla was watering the plants. Farid was joking with a customer. Every face was familiar. Every face was loved. He leaned against a shelf and closed his eyes, breathing in the scent of old paper and fresh flowers. That night, he locked the bookshop and walked home with Layla. The moon was full and bright above them. He took her hand and looked up at it. "I made a promise to watch every full moon," he said, "and I have. Every single one." She squeezed his hand. "And you will watch many more." He smiled and kissed her forehead. They walked into the night, two people who had found their way, carrying the lessons of the loop into a future that was wide open and full of light. Tariq woke the next morning and felt a sense of calm he had never known before. He stretched his arms above his head and looked around the apartment. The yellow curtains glowed in the morning light. The plant on the windowsill was thriving. Layla was still asleep beside him, her crimson hair spread across the pillow like a fiery halo. He smiled and gently brushed a strand from her face. He slipped out of bed quietly and walked to the kitchen. He prepared tea and toast, moving with practiced ease. He sat at the small table and watched the sun rise over the city, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, the loops, the gold, the loss, the discovery. He had no regrets. Layla joined him a few minutes later, her hair messy and her eyes still sleepy. She sat across from him and reached for his hand. "You're up early," she murmured. He squeezed her fingers. "Couldn't sleep. Too happy." She laughed softly and sipped her tea. They sat in comfortable silence, the morning light wrapping around them like a warm blanket. At the bookshop, Tariq found Amal already at work. She had rearranged the front display to feature books on community building and kindness. He walked over and studied the arrangement with approval. "This is beautiful," he said. She looked up and smiled. "I thought it was time we celebrated what we've built." He nodded, his chest swelling with pride. Farid arrived with his girlfriend, the bubbly woman with glasses. She had started volunteering regularly, her cheerful presence lifting everyone's spirits. She immediately began organizing the children's section, humming a happy tune. Farid watched her with lovesick eyes. Tariq threw a paper ball at him. "Get a room," he teased. Farid caught it and threw it back. Omar came in after school, his backpack slung over one shoulder. He had grown even taller over the past year, his face losing its boyish roundness. He grabbed a stack of books and began shelving them without being asked. Tariq watched him work and felt a surge of paternal pride. Omar was his legacy, in a way. A boy who had become a young man under his guidance. Noor arrived for her scholarship orientation. She was nervous but excited, her hands clutching a folder of documents. Layla greeted her warmly and led her to the back room. Tariq followed and sat in on the orientation, offering words of encouragement. Noor's eyes glistened with determination. "I won't let you down," she promised. Tariq shook his head. "You could never let us down." The orientation went smoothly. Noor asked thoughtful questions and took copious notes. Layla walked her through the program requirements and support systems. By the end, Noor was smiling with confidence. She shook both their hands and left with a spring in her step. Layla turned to Tariq. "She's going to be amazing," she said. He nodded. "She already is." That evening, Tariq and Layla had dinner with his mother. The kitchen was warm and fragrant, with the smell of roasting chicken and spices. His mother had outdone herself, preparing a feast. Farid joined them too, his girlfriend in tow. The table was crowded and noisy, filled with laughter and overlapping conversations. Tariq looked around and felt his heart overflow. His mother raised her glass for a toast. "To my son," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Who taught an old woman that it's never too late to be proud?" Everyone raised their glasses and cheered. Tariq felt tears prick his eyes. He blinked them away quickly and raised his own glass. "To family," he said, "the one that is given and the one we choose." After dinner, they gathered in the living room. Farid's girlfriend brought out a deck of cards, and they played a raucous game that involved a lot of cheating and even more laughter. Tariq's mother won 3 rounds in a row, her sharp eyes missing nothing. Farid accused her of witchcraft. She laughed and dealt another hand. The evening wound down slowly, reluctantly. Guests trickled out one by one, their faces flushed with warmth and good food. Tariq helped his mother with the dishes, standing side by side at the sink. She handed him a plate and said, "You've become a good man, Tariq. I always knew you would." He kissed her cheek and said, "I learned from the best." He and Layla walked home through the quiet streets. The moon was waxing, a silver crescent hanging in the dark sky. He pointed at it and said, "I used to ignore the moon. Now I look for it every night." She leaned into him. "You see everything now. That's your gift." He smiled and tucked his arm around her. The next day at the bookshop, Tariq received a visit from the mayor. The mayor was a tall, distinguished woman with silver-streaked hair and a firm handshake. She had heard about the community fund and the bookshop and wanted to see them for herself. Tariq gave her a tour, his voice steady and proud. The mayor walked through every room, stopping to talk to volunteers and visitors. She asked thoughtful questions about their operations and impact. At the end of the tour, she turned to Tariq with admiration. "You've built something extraordinary," she said. "I want to help you expand to other neighborhoods." Tariq's breath caught in his throat. They sat in the back room and discussed the details. The mayor offered city funding and logistical support. Tariq asked for time to consult with his team. She agreed and left her card, promising to follow up. After she left, Tariq leaned against the wall and slid down to the floor. His hands were shaking. Farid found him there and asked, "Are you okay?" Tariq looked up, his eyes wide. "We just got city backing." Farid's jaw dropped. He joined Tariq on the floor, both of them sitting in stunned silence. Then Farid burst into laughter. "We're going to be huge," he shouted. Tariq laughed too, the sound echoing off the walls. They sat on the floor like two children, laughing until their stomachs hurt. The news spread quickly through the neighborhood. Mr. Aziz sent over a tray of pastries. Mrs. Hanan began calculating the new budget. Amal started planning new programs. Even the stray cats seemed to sense the excitement, gathering outside the bookshop, as if waiting for a celebration. Tariq called Layla and told her the news. She screamed with joy on the other end of the line. "This is everything we dreamed of," she exclaimed. He smiled and nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "It's just the beginning," he said. "There's so much more we can do." They held a community meeting that evening. The bookshop was packed, people standing in the aisles and sitting on the floor. Tariq stood at the front and announced the expansion plans. The crowd erupted in applause. Faces lit up with hope and excitement. He raised his hands for silence and continued. "We're not leaving this neighborhood," he assured them. "We're building bridges. We want to take what we've learned here and share it with others." The crowd nodded and murmured their approval. A young woman raised her hand and asked, "How can we help?" Tariq smiled. "You already are helping, just by being here." The community meeting lasted 2 hours. People offered ideas, resources, and time. A retired teacher offered to lead literacy classes. A local artist offered to paint murals. A group of teenagers offered to help with setup. Tariq wrote everything down, his notebook filling with pages of possibilities. After the meeting, Tariq sat alone in the empty bookshop. The chairs were still arranged in rows, a testament to the community that had filled them. He walked slowly between the aisles, running his fingers along the spines of books. He stopped at a worn copy of a novel he had read during the loop. He pulled it out and opened it. On the inside cover was a note in faded handwriting. It read, "To whoever finds this, life is not about the years you live, but the lives you touch." He recognized the handwriting of Fauzi's. The old man had left messages everywhere, waiting to be discovered. Tariq closed the book and held it to his chest. He took the book home and placed it on his nightstand. He opened it that night and read the story, a tale of a man who traveled across the world to find himself, only to discover that home was where he had always been. He finished the book in one sitting, his eyes heavy with tears. Fauzi had given him one final gift. The next morning, he walked to the bookshop with renewed purpose. He gathered his team, Farid, Layla, Mrs. Hanan, Amal, and a few others, and presented his vision. "We're not just expanding," he said. "We're building a network of hope. Every neighborhood deserves what we have here." The team worked together to create a blueprint. They would start with one new location in a nearby community. Tariq would oversee the launch. Farid would handle logistics. Layla would design the programs. Mrs. Hanan would manage the finances. Amal would train new volunteers. Everyone had a role, and everyone was essential. They visited the new location together. It was an abandoned building, dusty and dark, with broken windows and peeling paint. But Tariq saw potential. He walked through the empty rooms, his footsteps echoing on the creaky floorboards. "This will be beautiful," he announced. "I can feel it." They spent the next weeks cleaning and renovating. Volunteers from both neighborhoods came together, painting walls and installing shelves. Tariq worked alongside them, his shirt stained with paint and sweat. He laughed and joked with the volunteers, his joy infectious. The building slowly transformed into a warm, welcoming space. Farid's girlfriend organized a food drive to stock the new location's kitchen. Boxes of canned goods and fresh produce appeared daily. The neighborhood rallied around the project, donating furniture and books and supplies. Tariq watched it all unfold and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. The day of the grand opening arrived. A crowd gathered outside the new building, their faces bright with anticipation. Tariq stood at the entrance, his heart pounding. He had done this before, but this time felt different. This time, he wasn't building for himself. He was building for everyone. He cut the ribbon with a pair of oversized scissors, his hands trembling slightly. The crowd cheered and surged forward into the new space. Children ran to the reading corner. Adults explored the meeting rooms. Volunteers directed traffic with happy efficiency. Tariq stood in the center and watched it all come to life. Farid found him there and threw an arm around his shoulder. "We did it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Tariq nodded, unable to speak. He patted Farid's hand and let the tears flow freely. They stood together, two friends who had built something from nothing. Layla appeared with a tray of refreshments, her yellow dress bright against the new white walls. She handed Tariq a cup of tea and kissed his cheek. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. He held her hand and squeezed it. "I couldn't have done it without you." She smiled and shook her head. "You would have found your way. I just helped you see it." The celebration spilled out into the street. Neighbors brought food and music. Someone started a spontaneous dance, and soon the whole block was swaying to the rhythm. Tariq danced with Layla, laughing as he stumbled over his own feet. Farid danced with his girlfriend, both of them completely ridiculous and utterly happy. As the sun set, the celebration wound down. People drifted home, their voices still buzzing with excitement. Tariq stood alone in the new building, looking around at the clean walls and the full shelves. He placed his hand on a nearby table and felt the solid reality of it. This was real. This was permanent. He walked back to his apartment that night with Layla. The streets were quiet, and the stars were bright. He looked up at them and remembered his promise. He had kept it. Every full moon. Every single one. He would keep watching. He would never stop paying attention. The weeks that followed were a blur of activity. The new location thrived, drawing in people from all over the city. The original bookshop and fund continued to operate, now part of a growing network. Tariq moved between them like a conductor, orchestrating the symphony of community efforts. Omar joined the team as a junior coordinator, his enthusiasm contagious. He organized youth events and led tours for new visitors. Tariq mentored him closely, offering guidance and encouragement. Omar soaked it all up like a sponge, his confidence growing daily. Noor completed her first semester with honors. She sent Tariq a handwritten letter of thanks, her words overflowing with gratitude. He read it twice and pinned it to his office wall, beside the wooden plaque and the photograph of Fauzi. His wall was becoming a tapestry of hope. Mrs. Hanan announced her retirement, her sharp eyes finally softening. She had trained her replacement, a young woman named Dahlia, who had the same efficiency and attention to detail. Tariq threw a small party for Mrs. Hanan, complete with cake and speeches. She cried and hugged everyone goodbye. Amal took over the book club full-time, expanding it to include children and families. The bookshop was now a hub of literary activity, hosting readings, signings, and workshops. Tariq watched it all with quiet joy. This was exactly what Fauzi had envisioned. One afternoon, Tariq received a letter from a prison inmate. The man had read about the community fund and wanted to know how he could help when he was released. Tariq wrote back personally, offering encouragement and a promise of support. The exchange became a regular correspondence, filled with hope and second chances. The inmate, a man named Khalid, was released after 6 months. Tariq met him at the bookshop and offered him a volunteer position. Khalid accepted with trembling hands. He worked hard, his past mistakes left behind. He became one of the most dedicated volunteers, his story inspiring others. Khalid's transformation caught the attention of a local journalist. A follow-up article was written about the community's ability to rehabilitate and heal. Tariq was quoted as saying, "Every person deserves a second chance. That's the entire point." The article spread further, attracting more attention and resources. The network expanded again. 2 more neighborhoods came on board, each with their own bookshop and fund. Tariq traveled to each location, offering training and support. He was exhausted but fulfilled. He had found his purpose, and he was living it every single day. Layla joined him on his travels, her calm presence keeping him grounded. They visited cities, met new people, and collected stories of resilience and hope. Tariq documented everything in his notebook, filling page after page with the faces and voices of the community they had built. One evening, after a long day of travel, they sat on a hotel balcony and watched the stars. Layla leaned into him and said, "We've done so much, but we're not done, are we?" He shook his head. "We're never done. That's the beauty of it. There's always more to give." He pulled out his notebook and began writing. "The loop taught me about time," he wrote, "but the years after taught me about eternity, not eternal life. Eternal love, eternal purpose, eternal hope, that's what lasts." Layla read over his shoulder and pressed a kiss to his cheek. They returned home to find the neighborhood thriving. The bookshop was busier than ever. The fund had helped thousands of families. The scholarship program had multiple students enrolled. Tariq walked through the familiar streets, greeting everyone by name. He was no longer a visitor in his own community. He was its heart. He visited his mother and found her in the garden, planting flowers. She had taken up gardening after retiring, her hands now covered in dirt. He sat beside her and began helping, his fingers sinking into the soft soil. They worked in silence, the sun warm on their backs. "You've done enough," she said quietly. "You can rest now." He looked at her and shook his head. "I can't rest, Mom. There's too much to do." She smiled and patted his hand. "Then do it, but don't forget to enjoy it too." He leaned over and kissed her cheek. "I won't. I promise." That night, he sat in his apartment and looked at the cracked ceiling. It was still cracked, but he had learned to see it differently. The cracks were not flaws. They were maps of survival. They told a story of a room that had witnessed transformation. He smiled and turned off the light. The next morning, he received an unexpected visitor. A young man stood at the bookshop door, his face familiar. It was Hussein's son, now a grown man. He had become a carpenter like his father, his hands calloused and strong. He had built a small wooden bench and wanted to donate it to the bookshop. Tariq accepted the bench with tears in his eyes. They spent the next weeks cleaning and renovating. Volunteers from both neighborhoods came together, painting walls and installing shelves. Tariq worked alongside them, his shirt stained with paint and sweat. He laughed and joked with the volunteers, his joy infectious. The building slowly transformed into a warm, welcoming space. Farid's girlfriend organized a food drive to stock the new location's kitchen. Boxes of canned goods and fresh produce appeared daily. The neighborhood rallied around the project, donating furniture and books and supplies. Tariq watched it all unfold and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. The day of the grand opening arrived. A crowd gathered outside the new building, their faces bright with anticipation. Tariq stood at the entrance, his heart pounding. He had done this before, but this time felt different. This time, he wasn't building for himself. He was building for everyone. He cut the ribbon with a pair of oversized scissors, his hands trembling slightly. The crowd cheered and surged forward into the new space. Children ran to the reading corner. Adults explored the meeting rooms. Volunteers directed traffic with happy efficiency. Tariq stood in the center and watched it all come to life. Farid found him there and threw an arm around his shoulder. "We did it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Tariq nodded, unable to speak. He patted Farid's hand and let the tears flow freely. They stood together, two friends who had built something from nothing. Layla appeared with a tray of refreshments, her yellow dress bright against the new white walls. She handed Tariq a cup of tea and kissed his cheek. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. He held her hand and squeezed it. "I couldn't have done it without you." She smiled and shook her head. "You would have found your way. I just helped you see it." The celebration spilled out into the street. Neighbors brought food and music. Someone started a spontaneous dance, and soon the whole block was swaying to the rhythm. Tariq danced with Layla, laughing as he stumbled over his own feet. Farid danced with his girlfriend, both of them completely ridiculous and utterly happy. As the sun set, the celebration wound down. People drifted home, their voices still buzzing with excitement. Tariq stood alone in the new building, looking around at the clean walls and the full shelves. He placed his hand on a nearby table and felt the solid reality of it. This was real. This was permanent. He walked back to his apartment that night with Layla. The streets were quiet, and the stars were bright. He looked up at them and remembered his promise. He had kept it. Every full moon. Every single one. He would keep watching. He would never stop paying attention. The weeks that followed were a blur of activity. The new location thrived, drawing in people from all over the city. The original bookshop and fund continued to operate, now part of a growing network. Tariq moved between them like a conductor, orchestrating the symphony of community efforts. Omar joined the team as a junior coordinator, his enthusiasm contagious. He organized youth events and led tours for new visitors. Tariq mentored him closely, offering guidance and encouragement. Omar soaked it all up like a sponge, his confidence growing daily. Noor completed her first semester with honors. She sent Tariq a handwritten letter of thanks, her words overflowing with gratitude. He read it twice and pinned it to his office wall, beside the wooden plaque and the photograph of Fauzi. His wall was becoming a tapestry of hope. Mrs. Hanan announced her retirement, her sharp eyes finally softening. She had trained her replacement, a young woman named Dahlia, who had the same efficiency and attention to detail. Tariq threw a small party for Mrs. Hanan, complete with cake and speeches. She cried and hugged everyone goodbye. Amal took over the book club full-time, expanding it to include children and families. The bookshop was now a hub of literary activity, hosting readings, signings, and workshops. Tariq watched it all with quiet joy. This was exactly what Fauzi had envisioned. One afternoon, Tariq received a letter from a prison inmate. The man had read about the community fund and wanted to know how he could help when he was released. Tariq wrote back personally, offering encouragement and a promise of support. The exchange became a regular correspondence, filled with hope and second chances. The inmate, a man named Khalid, was released after 6 months. Tariq met him at the bookshop and offered him a volunteer position. Khalid accepted with trembling hands. He worked hard, his past mistakes left behind. He became one of the most dedicated volunteers, his story inspiring others. Khalid's transformation caught the attention of a local journalist. A follow-up article was written about the community's ability to rehabilitate and heal. Tariq was quoted as saying, "Every person deserves a second chance. That's the entire point." The article spread further, attracting more attention and resources. The network expanded again. 2 more neighborhoods came on board, each with their own bookshop and fund. Tariq traveled to each location, offering training and support. He was exhausted but fulfilled. He had found his purpose, and he was living it every single day. Layla joined him on his travels, her calm presence keeping him grounded. They visited cities, met new people, and collected stories of resilience and hope. Tariq documented everything in his notebook, filling page after page with the faces and voices of the community they had built. One evening, after a long day of travel, they sat on a hotel balcony and watched the stars. Layla leaned into him and said, "We've done so much, but we're not done, are we?" He shook his head. "We're never done. That's the beauty of it. There's always more to give." He pulled out his notebook and began writing. "The loop taught me about time," he wrote, "but the years after taught me about eternity, not eternal life. Eternal love, eternal purpose, eternal hope, that's what lasts." Layla read over his shoulder and pressed a kiss to his cheek. They returned home to find the neighborhood thriving. The bookshop was busier than ever. The fund had helped thousands of families. The scholarship program had multiple students enrolled. Tariq walked through the familiar streets, greeting everyone by name. He was no longer a visitor in his own community. He was its heart. He visited his mother and found her in the garden, planting flowers. She had taken up gardening after retiring, her hands now covered in dirt. He sat beside her and began helping, his fingers sinking into the soft soil. They worked in silence, the sun warm on their backs. "You've done enough," she said quietly. "You can rest now." He looked at her and shook his head. "I can't rest, Mom. There's too much to do." She smiled and patted his hand. "Then do it, but don't forget to enjoy it too." He leaned over and kissed her cheek. "I won't. I promise." That night, he sat in his apartment and looked at the cracked ceiling. It was still cracked, but he had learned to see it differently. The cracks were not flaws. They were maps of survival. They told a story of a room that had witnessed transformation. He smiled and turned off the light. The next morning, he received an unexpected visitor. A young man stood at the bookshop door, his face familiar. It was Hussein's son, now a grown man. He had become a carpenter like his father, his hands calloused and strong. He had built a small wooden bench and wanted to donate it to the bookshop. Tariq accepted the bench with tears in his eyes. Confidence and hope. Tariq watched them and felt a deep satisfaction. This was why he existed. This was why the loop had happened. Not for money, for moments like this. They returned home to a hero's welcome. The neighborhood had decorated the bookshop with banners and flowers. A small party was waiting for them. Tariq walked through the crowd, shaking hands and hugging friends. He felt like he had never left. This was his home. These were his people. He found his mother in the crowd, her eyes wet with tears. She hugged him tightly and said, "I'm so proud of you." He held her close and whispered, "I'm proud of us." They stood together, mother and son, surrounded by a community that had become their extended family. That night, Tariq sat in his apartment and opened Fauzi's journal. He flipped through the pages, reading the entries he had memorized long ago. He reached the last page and found a new message. It wasn't written by Fauzi. It was written by someone else, someone who had found the journal after Fauzi's passing. The message read, "To the one who carries on, the loop was never about the years. It was about the lessons. And the lessons never end. Keep teaching, keep learning, keep loving." Tariq read it 3 times. He placed the journal on his nightstand and smiled. The message wasn't a conclusion. It was a beginning. He and Layla decided to take a short vacation. They drove to the coast, the same cottage by the sea where they had spent their honeymoon. They walked on the beach, their feet sinking into the warm sand. The ocean stretched out before them, endless and eternal. Tariq looked at it and felt at peace. They sat on the shore and watched the sunset. Layla rested her head on his shoulder. "Do you ever miss the loop?" she asked quietly. He thought for a long moment. "I miss some things," he admitted. "The certainty, the knowing. But I don't miss the fear, the hunger, the loneliness." She squeezed his hand. "Now I have uncertainty," he continued. "But I also have you, and Farid, and the bookshop, and the fund, and all the people who believe in what we're doing. That's better than certainty. That's faith." She kissed his shoulder. "You've become so wise," she said. He laughed softly. "I had good teachers." They returned from the coast refreshed and renewed. Tariq threw himself back into his work with renewed energy. He visited every location in their growing network, meeting with volunteers and community members. He listened to their stories and offered his support. He was no longer just a founder, he was a connector. The network continued to expand. New communities reached out, eager to join the movement. Tariq developed a comprehensive training program that could be replicated anywhere. He wrote a manual, Building Hope, that became a guide for community organizers across the country. He was no longer just helping one neighborhood, he was helping a generation. He received an invitation to speak at a national conference. He stood in front of hundreds of people and shared his story, the loop, the gold, the loss, the discovery. He spoke without notes, his voice steady and warm. The audience listened in rapt silence, their faces reflecting a range of emotions. I was obsessed with money, he told them. I thought it was the only thing that could save me. But I was wrong. What saved me was community, connection, love. That's what I want to share with all of you. The audience erupted in applause, and Tariq felt the tears flow freely down his cheeks. After his speech, a young woman approached him. She had tears in her eyes. I've been trying to start a community garden in my neighborhood, she said. No one would listen. But after hearing you, I feel like I can do anything. Tariq smiled and gave her his card. Call me. I'll help you. He stayed true to his word. Over the following months, he mentored dozens of young leaders. He answered their calls, reviewed their plans, offered encouragement and advice. He saw himself in each of them euros, the hunger, the doubt, the longing for meaning. He gave them what he had needed most, belief. One of the young leaders, a man named Adnan, started a community farm. Another, a woman named Maya, launched a free tutoring program. A third, a teenager named Samir, created a youth council. Tariq watched them all with a quiet pride. He was not just building institutions, he was building people. The bookshop continued to thrive. Amail had become a master curator, filling the shelves with books that reflected the community's diversity. The reading groups had expanded to include poetry nights and writing workshops. Tariq attended as often as he could, always sitting in the back, always listening. One evening, a young boy approached him in the bookshop. The boy was shy, clutching a worn notebook. He asked Tariq to sign it. Tariq knelt down and asked, "What's your name?" The boy whispered, "Yusuf." Tariq wrote, "For Yusuf, the story is yours to write. Make it beautiful." The boy hugged the notebook and ran off. Tariq stood up and watched the boy go. He felt a familiar warmth spread through his chest. This was why he had survived the loop. This was why he had given away the gold. This was why he had opened the bookshop. For moments like this, for the next generation. That night, he sat in his apartment and looked at the cracked ceiling. The cracks had become familiar companions, their patterns as recognizable as the lines on his own palms. He no longer saw them as flaws. He saw them as history, the history of a room that had witnessed transformation. He took a photograph of the ceiling and pinned it to his wall, beside the photographs of Fauzi and the community. He wanted to remember where he had started. The cracks were his origin story. They reminded him of how far he had come. Layla found him staring at the wall. She wrapped her arms around him from behind. "You're thinking about the beginning again," she observed. He nodded. "I want to remember. I never want to forget." She rested her chin on his shoulder. "You won't. It's written on your heart." They stood together, looking at the wall. It was covered now with photographs, letters, and small tokens of gratitude. A piece of the wooden plaque, a photograph of Noor at graduation, a drawing from a child in the reading group. Each item told a story. Each story was a thread in the tapestry of their lives. Tariq turned to Layla and took her hands. "I want to write a book," he said. "Our story, the loop, the gold, the discovery. I want to share it with the world." She looked at him, her blue eyes soft. "I think that's a beautiful idea," he smiled. "Then I'll start tomorrow." He began writing the next morning. He sat at his desk, the sunlight streaming through the yellow curtains, and wrote the first sentence. "I woke up on January 1st, 2026. For the fourth time." His pen moved across the page, his handwriting neat and careful. He wrote about the desperation, the obsession, the emptiness. He wrote about the gold, the loss, the discovery. He wrote about Layla, about Farid, about his mother. He wrote about the bookshop and the fund. He wrote about Fauzi and the journal. He wrote about the community and the network. He wrote about the young leaders and the second chances. He wrote about everything,